Society tells us, like, from the time we are really young, that surviving a life-threatening illness together creates this unbreakable bond.
Right, you see it everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. You see it in movies, we read it in all those inspiring memoirs, we hear it in interviews. Two people enter this crucible of a terrifying diagnosis. They fight the battle side by side.
Yeah.
They emerge on the other side, just, forged in fire.
Tied together by eternal gratitude, right?
Right. Profound mutual love. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the trauma of saving someone's life, of giving up your entire identity to become their lifeline, is actually the exact mechanism that destroys the friendship?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is a heavy question.
It is. I mean, what if the proximity required to keep someone alive breeds this desperate, almost biological need for separation?
Well, I mean, it completely challenges the very foundation of how we view compassion,
Yeah.
Because we are conditioned to view empathy and caregiving as these endless resources.
Like a bottomless well.
Exactly. Like wells that just automatically refill themselves through the sheer power of love. The cultural script basically dictates that true friendship means boundless sacrifice. You give until it hurts. And then when it hurts, you just find a way to give more.
Yeah, you just dig deeper.
Right. And to say otherwise, to suggest that your capacity to care for a sick friend actually has a hard, unyielding limit,
Yeah.
well, that's one of the last remaining social taboos.
It really is.
It brings up this visceral discomfort because it forces us to look at the mechanical reality of human endurance, right? Rather than that romanticized ideal of selflessness we all want to believe in.
And that is exactly why today's deep dive is going to be so intense. We are looking at a piece of source material that just completely shatters that romanticized ideal.
It really does.
Yeah, and we aren't analyzing, a massive stack of peer-reviewed medical journals on caregiver fatigue today, nor are we looking at some polished, best-selling self-help book about boundary setting written from the safety of, 10 years of hindsight.
No, not at all.
We have a single emotionally explosive piece of text. It is an anonymous confession posted on a Reddit blog. It's short, it is incredibly raw, and it is written right from the agonizing, messy middle of a crisis. So our mission today is to take this snapshot of human experience and put it under a microscope.
I'm ready.
We are going to look at the unspoken limits of caregiving, the shifting dynamics of friendship under immense pressure, and really the biology of guilt.
The anonymity of this source is actually what gives it its immense value.
Oh, totally. Because there's no filter.
Exactly. I mean, when a person writes a memoir, they know an audience is watching.
Right.
They curate the narrative to ensure they remain the protagonist, or at least, a sympathetic figure.
Right, they want to look good.
But on an anonymous forum, that filter is just completely removed. We are getting a real-time feed of someone's cognitive dissonance. The author is caught in this war between their biological imperative for survival and their sociological conditioning to be the quote-unquote good friend.
Which is such a terrifying place to be.
It is. They're voicing a reality that thousands of caregivers experience daily, but are utterly terrified to say out loud for fear of being ostracized.
I want to frame this for you, the listener, with an analogy, but I want to take it a step further than we normally do. So we all know the classic airplane oxygen mask rule, right?
Secure your own mask before assisting others.
Exactly. In the event of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, you put yours on first. And logically, it makes total sense. If you passed out from hypoxia, you can't help anyone else. You save yourself so you have the capacity to save the person next to you.
Right. It's just basic physics and biology.
Great. But this text, it doesn't deal with that initial drop in pressure. This text deals with the aftermath. What happens when you already followed the rule, or maybe, you ignored it and gave your oxygen away. Yeah. You took your mask off, you gave it to your friend, you held your breath until the veins in your neck bulged, you managed to survive the crisis, you finally got your mask back on, and you just started taking normal deep breaths again.
You finally get to relax.
Exactly. And then, out of nowhere, the cabin depressurizes a second time. You are asked to hold your breath again. Do you do it? Can your body physically endure that a second time?
Well, the biological reality there is that the second deprivation isn't just a repeat of the first. It is an entirely different physiological event.
Because you're already depleted.
Exactly. The first time the pressure drops, your body relies on acute stress responses. You have the benefit of shock and massive, massive surges of adrenaline.
That superhero strength everyone talks about.
Right, right. But the second time, your system is already damaged. Crucially, your nervous system remembers the trauma of that first oxygen deprivation.
Oh, wow. So your body actually remembers it. Oh, absolutely. Your amygdala recognizes the threat and your body physically rebels. That resistance, that desperate, uncontrollable need for the oxygen of one's own peace, that is the invisible engine driving the author's confession here. Well, let's just get straight into the text. The author begins by detailing that first loss of cabin pressure. She writes, and I'm quoting here, "My friend was diagnosed over a year ago with ALL. At first, we were in shock, but hurriedly rearranged our entire lives, home, and everything to take care of her."
Yeah.
So let's establish the medical reality first. ALL stands for acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It is a type of cancer of the blood and bone marrow. And the word acute is really the operative term there.
It is. It's incredibly aggressive.
Right. It moves fast, and it demands immediate, overwhelming medical intervention.
You know, the linguistic choices the author makes in that single opening sentence are just a perfect mirror for the pathology of the disease itself.
Oh, how so?
Well, the cancer was acute and sudden, right? And the author's response was acute and sudden. Look at the word she uses right there, hurriedly.
Yeah, hurriedly rearranged everything.
This indicates a textbook amygdala hijack. I mean, in a state of profound psychological shock, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for complex planning, long-term boundary setting, rational risk assessment, it is effectively bypassed.
It just shuts down entirely.
Completely. The brain perceives a mortal threat to a loved one and shifts entirely into survival mode. There was no hesitation, no negotiation, no sitting down with a calendar to map out a sustainable care rotation.
Right, there's no logic to it.
Exactly. Hurriedly implies a total bypass of logical boundary setting in favor of pure instinctual mobilization.
And it is the sheer scale of that mobilization that is so staggering to me. Like, she doesn't say, I started spending my weekends at the hospital, or I took over making her dinners.
No, it's way more extreme than that.
She says they hurriedly rearranged our entire lives, home, and everything. She surrendered her physical sanctuary. I mean, think about the gravity of giving up your home.
It's massive.
The living room is no longer a place to watch television, right? It is a triage center. The refrigerator is no longer just for groceries. It is a temperature-controlled vault for specialized medications.
Yeah, you lose all sense of normalcy.
The ambient noise of the house changes from relaxation to the hum of medical equipment or, the sounds of someone in severe pain. The boundary between the terrifying, chaotic outside world and the private refuge of the home is just completely obliterated.
And the concept of the home is so critical to understand from a neurobiological perspective. Because the home is not just a building, it is a psychological anchor.
Like a safe harbor.
Exactly. For the human nervous system to recover from the daily stresses of life, it requires an environment that is completely free of threat cues.
Okay.
This allows the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest network, to engage. By opening her home to be the primary site of intensive life or death caregiving, the author didn't just sacrifice her time, she destroyed her own parasympathetic trigger.
Wow, so she couldn't rest even if she wanted to.
Right. Her home became a continuous source of high-alert threat cues. She was literally living inside the emergency.
Which really brings up the biology of a sprint versus a marathon. When that initial shock hits, the body floods with adrenaline and cortisol. You enter this sprint mentality.
Yes.
You can summon explosive, almost superhuman energy to pull someone out of a burning car. But you cannot biologically sustain a sprint for a marathon distance.
It's just impossible.
Right. And the author, by hurriedly rearranging everything and absorbing the crisis into her own living space, she basically set a precedent that treated a year-long medical marathon as if it were a 100-meter dash.
And that mismatch between the required endurance and the physiological response, that is the exact blueprint for severe caregiver burnout.
Because the body just gives out?
Well, the human body is remarkably adept at handling acute stress. Cortisol spikes, glucose is released into the bloodstream for immediate energy, and non-essential functions like digestion are just suppressed.
Okay, so you're primed for action.
Right. But when that state is sustained for weeks and months, it transforms into chronic stress. The continuous presence of cortisol begins to inflict real structural damage.
Wait, structural damage to the brain?
Yes. It shrinks the hippocampus, which impairs memory and emotional regulation. It degrades the immune system. We call this allostatic load, the physical wear and tear on the body resulting from chronic overactivity of the stress response systems.
Oh, wow. So she was physically hurting herself.
Exactly. The author was accumulating massive allostatic load while believing she was just, being a good friend.
You listening to this have likely experienced a micro version of this. Think of a time you dropped absolutely everything for a sudden crisis, a family emergency, a friend going through a devastating loss, maybe just a brutal crunch time at work.
Yeah, we've all been there.
You mobilize, you hyper-focus, and inherently you put a complete pause on your own identity, your hobbies, your sleep, your peace. You can endure that for a few days, maybe a few weeks, but imagine sustaining that total erasure of your own life for over a year.
It's unthinkable for most people.
Your entire identity is subsumed. You cease to be a multifaceted person, and your entire existence is just reduced to the functional utility of caregiver.
And notice the collective language the author uses during this initial phase. She says, "At first we were in shock, but hurriedly rearranged our entire lives."
Right, we and our.
In intense caregiving scenarios, especially those involving life-threatening illnesses, there is often this profound enmeshment of identities. The boundary between the healthy person and the sick person blurs entirely.
They just merge.
Right. The cancer didn't just invade the friend's bloodstream, it invaded the household. It became a shared ecosystem of trauma, where every single fluctuation in the patient's health became a fluctuation in the caregiver's psychological state.
But the active crisis eventually morphs, right? The initial sprint gives way to the grueling reality of treatment. The author summarizes this brutally difficult phase in just a handful of words.
Yeah, she glosses over a lot.
She really does, she writes. She did several rounds of chemotherapy over a few months, and then some immunotherapy. She was then considered in remission, and we thought that was the end of it.
Those few words, over a few months, they mask a terrifying expanse of human suffering.
I can't even imagine.
Several rounds of chemotherapy for all owls means enduring the visceral reality of systemic toxicity. It means watching someone you love physically deteriorate in order to be saved.
Right.
For the caregiver, it means months of living in a state of absolute hypervigilance. They are perpetually braced for the sudden fever that requires a midnight dash to the emergency room.
Every little cough is a crisis.
Exactly. They are managing complex medication schedules while operating on severely fragmented sleep. The allostatic load we discussed earlier. It is compounding daily.
And then the treatment shifts to immunotherapy, which is another intense gauntlet. And then finally, after navigating this absolute minefield for months, the magic words are delivered. Right. Considered in remission. It is the phrase that every cancer patient and every terrified family member just prays for. It is the finish line of the marathon.
Considered in remission, it provides a definitive external endpoint. The medical establishment declares the immediate threat neutralized.
Right. The doctor says you're good.
Right. However, the caregiver's response to this declaration is rarely a simple, joyous return to normal life. To understand why, we really have to look at how the brain processes rewards and expectations.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So in mountaineering, there is a phenomenon known as the false summit. You are climbing a brutal, nearly vertical face. Your muscles are failing, oxygen is thin, you are in absolute agony.
It's just crushing through the pain.
Yes. But you look up and you see the ridgeline, the peak. Your brain recognizes the approaching finish line and releases a targeted surge of dopamine, a reward prediction error, we call it, that gives you the final burst of energy required to pull yourself over the ledge.
You're right. You spend your absolute last reserves because you know you are about to finally rest.
Exactly. You pull yourself over the edge, the mist clears, and you look up, and you realize it wasn't the top.
Oh, no.
It was just a ridge hiding another massive, terrifying peak. The dopamine that just flooded your system instantly drops completely below baseline.
So you just crash.
You crash hard. You are thrust into a state of acute neurochemical deficit. You don't just feel tired. You feel a profound, paralyzing despair. Your body, which was running entirely on the fumes of anticipated relief, simply shuts down. The thought of picking the heavy pack back up isn't just unappealing. The nervous system registers it as a biological impossibility.
And that biological impossibility of sprinting a marathon is exactly why the moment the doctor says the word remission, the caregiver's body doesn't celebrate, it just collapses.
Exactly.
The author says, and we thought that was the end of it. Again, the collective language. The hope was this shared hallucination of safety. When you reach what you believe is the summit, you mentally put down the pack.
You finally exhale.
Right. You let your guard down. The engine, which has been running impossibly hot for a year, is finally allowed to cool. And it's only when the engine cools that you realize the fuel tank is entirely bone dry.
Well, during the active treatment phase, the sheer panic acts as an anesthetic to the caregiver's own exhaustion.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, you don't feel the damage because the adrenaline masks it. But when remission is declared, the adrenaline evaporates. The body finally recognizes that the immediate mortal danger has passed, and it demands payment for the year of borrowed energy.
The bill comes due.
The bill comes due. The caregiver feels the accumulated trauma, the sleep debt, the physical toll of chronic cortisol exposure. They realize they are completely hollowed out.
Which leads directly to the most surprising and, frankly, the most challenging revelation in this entire text.
Yeah, this is the part that catches people off guard.
It really does. The assumption from the outside world would be that remission brings a joyous reunion, a celebration of life. But that is not what happened here. The fracture in the relationship didn't occur when the cancer returned. The fracture occurred during the remission.
Right.
While the friend was supposedly healthy, recovering, moving on with her life, the author was actively, intentionally pulling away.
Yeah. The author writes, let me find it. The relationship has changed as I have decided that for my peace, I needed to distance myself and be happy, and I have been.
Just a total pivot.
It is. She follows this later by clarifying the extent of this boundary. She says, I have not even seen her since January. This is the pivot point of the confession. It completely dismantles the societal expectation of the trauma bond.
I want to play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener because reading that line feels incredibly jarring.
Yeah.
A cynical interpretation would be, wow, so the friend gets better, the exciting drama of the crisis is over, and the author just gets bored and bails. Isn't she just a bad friend who stuck around for the tragedy but couldn't handle the mundane reality of recovery?
I hear that a lot.
Right. Because society conditions us to think that if you truly love someone during their illness, you'd want to be around them when they are healthy. Why does she need to distance herself from a friend who survived?
Well, that cynical interpretation is exactly the societal script the author is fighting against. But it completely ignores the mechanics of trauma.
How so?
Distancing for peace isn't just a preference. It's a psychological quarantine. We have to examine the extreme power imbalance inherent in intensive caregiving.
Okay, a power imbalance.
Yeah. Think about it. A healthy friendship requires equilibrium, mutual support, shared interests, reciprocity. But when one person becomes entirely dependent on the other for their literal survival, that equilibrium is completely annihilated.
It's totally gone.
The relationship is fundamentally redefined. The sick person becomes the center of gravity, and the caregiver becomes basically a satellite in a decaying orbit.
Wow. So even when the cancer goes into remission, the ghost of that terrifying dynamic just remains in the room.
Exactly.
The power imbalance doesn't magically reset just because the blood work comes back clean.
Precisely. The environment itself becomes a trigger. The caregiver looks at the friend and doesn't just see their buddy from a few years ago. Their nervous system sees the source of their most profound exhaustion.
Oh, that is so dark, but so true.
They see the person whose pain dictated their sleep schedule, whose illness turned their home into a hospital. The friend, through absolutely no fault of their own, becomes a living reminder of the caregiver's trauma and loss of autonomy.
So the distancing is an act of survival.
It is. The author needed physical and emotional space to essentially deprogram herself from the role of full-time savior and remember who she was as an individual.
It is an act of profound compartmentalization. She had to sever the enmeshment, and she admits it worked. She says, I needed to distance myself and be happy, and I have been.
I have been.
Yeah, that phrase, I have been, carries a massive amount of weight. It means she successfully rebuilt her baseline, she reclaimed her home, she established a perimeter around her life, expelled the chaos of the disease, and found a way to regulate her own nervous system again. She found her peace.
Notice the shift from the collective we to the singular I.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I have decided.
Yeah.
My peace. I needed to distance myself. For a year, the disease made all the decisions. Now, the author is exercising agency. Reclaiming autonomy is the first necessary step in recovering from severe burnout.
She has to take control back.
She is acknowledging that being in the friend's presence was actively detrimental to her own recovery.
I mean, think about the bravery required to admit that. You, listening to this, have you ever loved someone deeply, but realized that being entangled in their life was destroying your own mental health?
It's a terrifying realization.
It really is. The societal pressure to remain devoted to a cancer survivor is astronomical. To say, I am glad you are alive, but I cannot be near you right now because I need to heal from what saving you did to me is an almost unspeakable truth.
It is the ultimate boundary.
But just as she has established this quarantine, just as her dopamine levels are stabilizing and her parasympathetic nervous system is finally allowing her to rest, the unthinkable happens.
The false summit reveals the true mountain.
The relapse. The text hits a brutal wall with 4 devastating words. She writes, "But now it's back."
Oof, just gut-wrenching.
The cancer has returned. It is the absolute collapse of the world the author just painstakingly rebuilt. And the response this time is drastically different.
Very different.
There is no hurriedly rearranging. There is no sprint. There is only a fierce, uncompromising, almost militant line drawn in the sand. She writes, "And this time I just cannot do it again. Not in my home, my safe space and peaceful place, and not full time."
I just cannot do it again. Look at that phrasing. She doesn't say, "I will not," which would imply a choice. She says, "I cannot," indicating a physical and psychological hard limit.
The tank is completely empty.
Right. And the redefinition of the home here is the most striking psychological element. During the initial diagnosis, the home was instantly sacrificed. It was offered up. Now she fiercely defends it as her safe space and peaceful place.
What actually happens in the brain when a space that was previously associated with trauma is finally reclaimed and then threatened again?
Well, it triggers an intense self-protective response rooted deeply in the amygdala. A safe space isn't merely a geographic location, it is an externalization of an internal boundary.
Okay, so it's a physical manifestation of her peace.
Yes. The author spent months scrubbing the invisible residue of the illness from her home. By explicitly identifying her home as her sanctuary, she is recognizing that the previous year violated that peace entirely, bringing the illness, the medical equipment, the chaotic schedule, and the sheer terror back into her home would mean the immediate, calculated destruction of her own mental health. Her brain is basically refusing the command to self-destruct.
She then adds a geographic detail that ramps the tension up to just an excruciating level. She says, she has her own house down the street, and I am not uprooting my entire life yet again.
Yeah.
Let's look closely at down the street. The physical distance is practically negligible. I mean, you could probably walk there in 3 minutes. Yet the emotional and psychological boundary being drawn is an impenetrable fortress wall.
Down the street really illustrates the profound difference between geographic proximity and emotional availability.
Right, they are not the same thing.
Not at all. The friend is right there. The proximity makes the refusal to help full-time feel incredibly visceral, but the author is utilizing that physical separation as a lifeline.
She's hanging on to it.
Exactly. Her own house means her own domain, her own separate ecosystem. The author is adamantly refusing to merge those ecosystems again. She knows the cost of uprooting her life because she just paid it.
This dynamic really mirrors the trauma of a soldier returning from a grueling combat deployment. You come home, you sit on your couch, you drink out of your favorite mug, and your nervous system finally stands down. You are safe.
You can breathe.
Right. But imagine, just as you finally get a full night's sleep, a commanding officer knocks on your door and hands you deployment papers. The war you thought you survived has flared up again, and you are ordered back to the exact same trenches.
Just devastating.
The prospect of going back, especially when you know firsthand the horrors of the front line, and especially because you thought you had already earned your peace, is paralyzing.
Yeah.
You physically cannot force yourself back onto the transport plane.
That analogy perfectly captures the sheer terror of the caregiver's relapse experience. The first time, ignorance is a shield.
You don't know what's coming.
Right? You don't know what you're volunteering for when you hurriedly rearrange your life.
Yeah.
But the second time, you have total, terrifying clarity.
You know exactly what full-time means.
She knows exactly what it means. It means the erasure of the self. Her refusal is a desperately conscious choice for self-preservation. And she links this refusal directly back to the fractured relationship, stating, not with the relationship having changed so much.
Because you cannot ask a fractured bridge to carry the weight of a freight train.
Wow. Yes, exactly.
The friendship is a casualty of the first bout with the disease. She is being asked to provide the most intimate, grueling level of care for a person from whom she had already intentionally distanced herself. It is just an impossible paradox.
Setting this boundary is the only way she survives. Biologically, psychologically, it is the correct and necessary action. But, human beings are not purely logical creatures. We exist within this complex web of social conditioning, empathy, and perceived moral duty. And the act of setting this boundary immediately triggers a massive emotional and psychological collapse, which forms the agonizing climax of the confession.
And that brings us to the collision of guilt and rationalization. The entire post is essentially suffocating in guilt. In the very first line, she declares, "I'm a terrible person," and she punctuates this with emojis.
Yeah, the emojis are key.
She uses a sad face, a face holding back tears. Later, she pleads, "God help me," and bluntly states, "I feel awful." These are the words of someone actively drowning in shame.
We really have to analyze the sociology of those emojis.
Really? Emojis?
Yes. It might seem trivial, but it's crucial. Why is an adult writing about life or death medical trauma forced to use digital caricatures of grief?
Because words aren't enough.
Exactly. Because language itself feels insufficient to bridge the gap of her cognitive dissonance. Emojis serve as a desperate shorthand. She is trying to visually signal her distress to offset the social taboo of her words.
Like, please look at my digital tears so you know I'm not a monster.
Precisely. She is saying, look at how much this boundary hurts me. Please do not judge me as heartless.
Yeah.
It is a digital plea for empathy from a society that she assumes will completely condemn her.
Cognitive dissonance is the core mechanism here. And let's break that down for a second. It's when you hold two fundamentally opposing beliefs or values at the exact same time, and the friction between them causes immense psychological pain.
It's an agonizing state to be in.
Her rational mind, her survival instinct, her parasympathetic nervous system knows unequivocally that she has reached her limit. It knows that stepping back into the fire will literally destroy her.
Right.
But her emotional mind, which is steeped in a lifetime of cultural messaging that says, real friends never give up, insists that choosing herself is a betrayal. The only conclusion her conditioned mind can reach is, I must be a terrible person.
The clash between the biological reality of finite energy and the societal expectation of infinite sacrifice is just violent. And to survive this cognitive dissonance, the human mind desperately scrambles for rationalization.
We see her do this in real time, right?
Yes. She argues with herself right there in the text. She says she has plenty of friends and family who can help her, and she offers a compromise to her own conscience. I will help, but I cannot do full-time again.
Well, here's where I have to push back again and ask the harsh question. Isn't she has plenty of friends and family? Just a classic diffusion of responsibility.
What do you mean?
Like, it sounds like passing the buck. She's looking down the street, seeing a burning building, and saying, well, there are other people with buckets of water. I don't need to throw mine. Is she just rationalizing her way out of the hard work?
Well, that is exactly what her guilt is telling her she is doing. But from a psychological standpoint, the diffusion of responsibility is often a necessary survival tactic, not a moral failing.
Okay, explain that.
The author is actively trying to demote herself from the role of primary caregiver to a secondary helper. During the first diagnosis, she absorbed the entirety of the crisis. Now she is recognizing the existence of a wider support network because she has to.
She literally has no other option.
Right. She is giving herself permission to be part of a community response rather than the sole Atlas carrying the sky on her shoulders alone. She isn't refusing to help. She explicitly says, I will help, but she is refusing to be consumed.
Which brings us to the purpose of the post itself. Why put this out into the void of Reddit? The title of the post is The Boundaries of Compassion. That doesn't sound like a confident thesis statement. It sounds like a desperate question.
The plea.
Is she writing this simply to seek absolution from complete strangers?
Absolutely. When our internal compass is spinning wildly, when biological survival dictates one path and societal guilt screams at us to take another, we seek external anchors.
We need someone to tell us we aren't crazy.
Exactly. She cannot validate her own boundaries because the guilt is just too loud. So she casts her confession into the digital ether, hoping against hope that a chorus of anonymous voices will reflect back to her the validation she desperately needs. She is begging the internet to say, your peace matters. You are not a monster. You did your shift.
Think about the crushing weight of the word no. I mean, how often do you, in your normal, everyday life, say yes, simply to avoid the agony of feeling like a bad person?
All the time.
You agree to take on extra work, you attend events you absolutely despise, you loan money you can't afford, All because the acute guilt of setting a boundary feels worse in the moment than the chronic exhaustion of crossing it.
It's so true.
Now, take that everyday, mundane, people-pleasing guilt, magnify it by a factor of 10,000, and place it in the context of a friend's cancer relapse. That is the inescapable crucible this author is trapped in.
The profound tragedy of this confession is that her logic is actually flawless. She writes, "I also need to have my own peace. That is a fundamental biological requirement for a functioning human life."
You have to have peace.
You do. But knowing you are logically correct offers zero protection against the emotional onslaught of culturally conditioned guilt. She knows she is making the only decision that allows her to survive, yet she is condemned to feel that her survival is a crime.
Well, we have taken a few sentences from an anonymous internet forum today and pulled back the layers to reveal an incredibly heavy, complex journey.
It really is a lot to process.
We looked at the initial frantic sprint where the amygdala hijacked the brain and obliterated all boundaries in the name of crisis response. We examined the crushing marathon of medical intervention and the biological devastation of the false summit, where the anticipated dopamine of remission was replaced by the realization of absolute depletion.
Right. And we analyzed the quiet, necessary fracture of the relationship, exploring how extreme power imbalances in caregiving destroy the equilibrium of friendship.
Requiring physical and emotional distancing simply to reset the nervous system.
Exactly. And we witnessed the agonizing reality of the relapse, the fierce defense of the home as a psychological sanctuary, and the violent collision between self-preservation and the societal script of endless sacrifice.
The journey of this text forces us to look in the mirror and ask incredibly uncomfortable questions about the nature of love and duty. What is the ultimate takeaway from this voice crying out in the dark?
You know, the deepest tragedy here isn't the return of the leukemia, horrific as that is. The silent tragedy is the author's grief over discovering her own human limitations. We desperately want to believe that our love gives us infinite capacity to protect the people we care about. This text violently dismantles that belief. It proves that compassion, practically speaking, is a finite resource.
It is finite.
The body and the mind have a hard, unyielding limit to the amount of allostatic load and trauma they can absorb, even in the service of profound love. Recognizing that limit and defending it is not a moral failure. It is the raw biological reality of being human.
Compassion is a finite resource. It's a terrifying truth. But if we refuse to accept it, we guarantee that the attempt to save others will inevitably destroy ourselves.
Very well said.
As we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to carry with you. We began with the analogy of the airplane oxygen mask and the sheer physiological impossibility of holding your breath a second time once you know the agony of the first. Imagine yourself forced into that exact crucible. If the universe ever forces you to choose between being perceived by everyone around you as the good, selfless friend, or protecting the fortress of your own mental survival, which path do you choose? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, how do you learn to live with the guilt of that choice?